What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks everybody for listening once again. Brian and I took a little bit of a hiatus, but we really want to do this podcast because it's so important for anybody who has a heart, and that would be all of us. So I want to talk about heart failure, congestive heart failure, and cardiomyopathies, and how those relate to each other.
Is this like when the Grinch's heart grew 3 times its size?
Yeah, yes, and that there's something to that. Yes. And unfortunately, as your heart grows, it gets bigger, and usually it's due to cardiovascular disease that can do that. Your heart just doesn't work as efficiently.
You see, all that love made him sick.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Too much love can be a problem, but also too much sadness can also be a problem. It's interesting because with heart failure, depression is really related to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And from a Chinese perspective, what's really interesting about that, they actually talk about that, like too much joy, think about mania, or too much sadness. There's actually something in Western medicine called broken heart syndrome. That's the common name. And that also can contribute to heart failure. So yeah, good point about the Grinch. So but those are not the main reasons why we get heart failure. I mean, think about what the heart does though. I mean, it's pumping blood throughout your body day in and day out, day in and day out. And eventually if it's pumping against resistance, and you can think about it, too much resistance. So think about high blood pressure, think about pumping through a pipe, your arteries that are not that don't give, right? That don't have any elasticity to them.
Or even
You
being
can get
dehydrated, having more viscous blood.
But that's right. So your heart has to work harder, right? So your heart is pushing against resistance, which then causes the actual heart itself to fail eventually. It's really as simple as what you would have with any mechanical pump. Heart goes way beyond that, but yeah, any mechanical pump that is working too hard is not going to function as well over time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, heart failure is just a general term. It describes a syndrome where the heart cannot pump enough blood to meet the body's needs. And in this country, I think we're up to about 6 million adults in the United States have heart failure. Approximately like 500,000 or so, maybe a little bit more, diagnosed in the United States each year.
Yeah, so if I go to a skilled nursing facility and I've got 8 people on my schedule, 1 to 5 of them have heart failure.
Right.
It's nuts. It's prevalent.
Yeah, it is prevalent. And the unfortunate thing is, and this is the reason why we're doing this podcast, is a lot of times people who have been diagnosed with congestive heart failure, just are kind of at the mercy of conventional medicine, and they don't give them any other natural options, which have shown to be really important for overcoming heart failure. Or at least one of the markers of heart failure is the ejection fraction. So, when you have heart failure, they're constantly looking at your ejection fraction, and I'll get into what that is. But anyway, that number is very important, and ejection fraction can be improved significantly with nutraceuticals, and the nutraceuticals I use for my heart failure patients have very, very little downside. I mean, in fact, I haven't had any issues with the way I do it with my protocol, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But let's go over the risk factors for it. And these risk factors, I mean, every podcast we do, we go over the kind of the same risk factors. Some are a little bit different with heart failure, but the main thing is, and this is where cardiomyopathies may come into, is a family history. Is there a genetic component to it? And I've had over the years a number of healthy people with heart failure that it just went undiagnosed until later on in life. And what they found, and some of these people were very fit, and what they found, this is genetic. This was a genetic thing. So there are genetic markers that can lead to heart failure, heart issues. But there's a ton of lifestyle stuff also. So one of the most known toxins to the body is alcohol. It's socially acceptable to drink, definitely in this country. Too much alcohol is toxic to the heart. So excessive alcohol consumption can cause heart failure. Smoking, of course, lack of physical activity, poor dietary habits. So the SAD diet, standard American diet, can definitely contribute. The heart has to work much, much harder with anybody being overweight or obese. And then are there other health conditions that can make heart failure worse? And they're the standard stuff, right? Is there a history of cardiovascular disease? Are the blood lipids too high? Is high blood pressure, blood sugar issues, diabetes? Definitely kidney disease is a big one. Lung issues. We talked about depression, sleep apnea when we talked about our sleep podcast, right? People who have sleep apnea, the heart really has to work hard with that. And sleep apnea is a big contributor. And that's why I'm a big proponent of, if you have sleep apnea, definitely get the lifestyle stuff in order. But man, the CPAP machine can really, really help with that, can help prevent that. And then, of course, there are certain medications, lots of cancer drugs. But stereotypically, the ones that I run across is like adriamycin, which is very, very toxic to the heart. Anybody who's on that should be on some type of heart supporting nutrients like CoQ10. And then there are even some antidepressants. I mean, so it's kind of crazy, right? Like a lot of drugs out there, and alcohol, which is something we don't even think about, can be really problematic for the heart. And I try to stress this to my patients with heart failure. Is like, first thing we have to do is let's clean up the lifestyle, whatever that may be. And some of them are really surprised. I mean, I really just do across the board say, get off the alcohol. 1 or 2 drinks, I just get off the alcohol, because it's not helping your heart. So what are the signs of it? And I'm sure you've run across this a lot, Brian, right? I mean, the main one is fatigue, difficulty breathing. I had a patient, gosh, probably 3 or 4 years ago, come in, and he was just having such difficulty breathing. And he had ascites, fluid buildup in his abdomen and in his legs. And it was crazy to me, because he he's coming to a naturopathic doctor, hoping for some type of nutraceutical to help him with that. But I mean, he was on the brink of having complete heart failure or an infarction or some type of heart attack. So of course, knowing those symptoms, that's end stage, we sent him right to the emergency room. And because of the fluid retention, the one thing they did, they took the pressure off the heart by getting rid of the fluid. Anyway, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. We put him on our protocol. He's doing great still to this day. So I still keep in touch with him. So
That's
it's great.
awesome.
So yeah, it is, because when people think about heart failure, they think, well, it's my time is short.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily true. You can really support your heart if you do the right things, no matter how far along you are with that, and yes, so the further progressed you are, the more dire the need for all types of intervention. As you get fluid retention, another sign and symptom is frequent urination, especially at nighttime. As the heart is stressed, you can get irregular beats. You can have decreased appetite. Nausea is kind of a symptom you may see. As you're not oxygenating tissues, it's normal to have difficulty concentrating. You're less alert. And then in really advanced stages, you just get swelling, wheezing, coughing, that type of thing. Let's just talk about what's actually going on with the heart, and then we'll just briefly talk about some of the conventional therapies, and then go into the nutraceuticals. If you think about the heart, what it does, it's a mechanical pump. It's basically taking blood that's not oxygenated well, right, from the body. So the venous symptom puts blood into the right atrium. The right atrium puts it into the right ventricle. The right ventricle definitely sends it to the lungs to be oxygenated. And then from there, it gets sent to the left atrium and then to the left ventricle. The left ventricle then pumps oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Most heart failure is left-sided. And so it's the left ventricle that usually is the issue. That's not always the case. There's something called cor pulmonale, where the lungs are putting the resistance against the right ventricle. But usually the left ventricle is the issue. And basically it's when the left ventricle has to push against too much resistance. So again, thinking about the elasticity of the arteries, the aorta not being very compliant or anything like that, or being too hard to pump against, you get that resistance, which then causes the heart to work too hard. And then it's working too hard against pressure. And then you get what's called the beginning stages of heart failure, where the heart can't, in that left ventricle, cannot pump all the blood out, right? If you can't pump all the blood out, then you can't oxygenate the body as well. Over time, the heart becomes more, think about it being more floppy, where it just does not have the strength to pump against that pressure. When that starts happening, now you have back pressure that goes all the way back towards the lungs and towards the right ventricle. So usually right-sided heart failure is due also to left-sided heart failure. That's the primary cause. Once that happens, you're pretty far along with heart failure. One of the most important ways to help prevent heart failure, and this is what the conventional guys check on you every time you go for your physical exam, is making sure your blood lipids are okay and making sure your blood pressure is okay. Blood pressure, anything over 120 over 80 for a sustained amount of time over time can cause heart failure if you live long enough, right? So I know that sounds crazy because people are going, wow, man, that sounds like a really good blood pressure. I bring it up because blood pressure with a systolic of 115 over 75 has not shown to cause any issues on the heart. So that's a good blood pressure. That's the optimal to shoot for over time. So your heart can sustain your body, well into, I mean, you see some of these centenarians well into and over 100 years. And that's what we want to do for our patients, 90s, 100s, 110. And people are living longer. If we can keep their heart going and keep their blood pressure down, it's a big deal. And blood pressure rises with, cardiovascular disease. So that's why we're, us doctors are constantly looking at your blood lipids, maybe doing calcium scores and things like that to make sure that your cardiovascular system is really good. So I tell people, that's why, blood pressure is a big deal. I really want to make sure that people are on top of that, because a lot of times that's really insidious, right? People don't think about it.
Right.
They don't even think about it. Right. It's a slow burn. And not only that, when doctors do recommend like blood pressure medications, a lot of people, of course, are resistant to that. And, unless they're really going to change their lifestyle and do some things and try some nutraceutical interventions to try to bring it down, it is really necessary. You want to keep your heart healthy as long as you can.
Right.
Anyway, so there's all kinds of things that can bring it on. Oh, and another thing I just also want to bring up is thyroid issues. So both hyperthyroidism, so that kind of makes sense, right? Hyperthyroidism, it like affects your metabolism. If you're hyperthyroid, think about somebody being very anxious, rapid heartbeat, the cardiovascular system is stressed. That can bring on heart failure. But also at the other side of the spectrum, so can hypothyroidism, where the thyroid's not working as well. So a lot of people will think, well, yeah, I have hypothyroid, and so I still have a thyroid, so maybe it's not absolutely necessary that I take thyroid medication. But over time, if you're not controlling that and being good about taking that medication, both hyper and hypo can contribute to it. Any type of defect with the heart can also bring on heart failure. So I'm thinking about, any of like the valve defects or anything like that can also bring it on. A lot of times that may be genetic.
Yeah. Problems with the mechanical pump, obviously.
Yeah, any problems with the mechanical pump. One thing about heart failure is it will it can't well, it reduces flow to the whole body, but one organ system that really takes the brunt of heart failure is your kidneys. And that goes both ways. So if somebody has kidney disease, it can also be a vicious cycle that can feed back onto your heart and also cause heart failure. Also, really, this is kind of interesting with end stage heart failure, or as you further progress, your kidney cannot filter out everything. And so a lot of times that contributes to fluid buildup in the body where the kidney just can't work as well with what the heart is doing. As the heart is compromised, the kidney doesn't work as well. Also, heart disease is a very strong predictor of mortality in patients that are on dialysis. And unfortunately, those two things can go hand in hand.
Right.
So let me just talk about ways that it's diagnosed. So any heart failure, anybody suspected of heart failure is going to have an electrocardiogram, an ECG. And that's just going to look and try to pick up any electrical abnormalities. It can also see if there's enlargement of the heart chambers. This is what can happen with heart failure, where you get enlargement of the heart chambers. And then also an echocardiogram. And the echocardiogram is one of the things that can really allow us to figure out what the ejection fraction is. And the ejection fraction, a normal ejection fraction should be anywhere from I think it's 50% to 75%. And what we're talking about is the amount of blood that is pumped out, or that is left in the heart chamber after the ventricle pumps it out. So that's a big marker. And when I treat heart failure along with the nutraceuticals and stuff, that's the number I'm really looking at. I want to make sure that the ejection fraction is improving, is getting higher.
Speaks to the efficiency of the pump.
Right. That's right. Exactly. And so that's the main marker, but there's other things like other diagnostics that can help, is like doing an MRI, CT scan. It helps evaluate the size and the thickness of the heart chambers. There are also biomarker tests. There's something called BNP, or B-type natriuretic peptide. And basically what that does is this BNP, when it's functioning normally, it sends signals to the kidney. So this is how the heart and the kidney talk to each other. And so this peptide sends signals to the kidney and just tells the kidney, well, it's time to release sodium and water into the urine, or it's time to hold on to it. And so as the heart muscles stretch, you may get more of this BNP secreted, which will talk to the kidneys. And if it's not functioning well, if it rises high, this BNP is getting too much, it's going to put stress on the kidneys and be problematic. And you really want that number to be low. There's another marker called troponins, or cardiac troponins, and these are proteins associated with muscle fibers in the heart, and they're released into circulation when the heart, or the cardiomyocytes, the heart cells, are damaged or not functioning as well. And basically you get an idea of how far along you are with that. Another thing that's also important, I've had a number of patients over the years with hemochromatosis, and we did a podcast. I forget the number we did on hemochromatosis way back a few years ago. But iron overload can also cause heart problems, but also on the other end of that spectrum is iron deficiency can also cause heart problems. And you can think about, like, if you're anemic and the heart is not oxygenating the tissues well, and you're also anemic, it can make the heart work a lot harder. and the kidney plays a role in whether you're anemic or not also. So here's that heart kidney connection, and it's really interesting to me. In traditional Chinese medicine, there's a strong connection energetically or from traditional Chinese medicine between the heart and the kidneys. And if the kidneys are not functioning well, the heart suffers, and vice versa. But in Western medicine, the kidneys secrete what's called erythropoietin, which is a hormone that tells your bone marrow to make more red blood cells. And if it's compromised, you can't make more red blood cells. And when you have cardiomyopathy or heart failure, cardiomyopathy that causes heart failure, just heart failure in general, you don't get that communication between the bone marrow and the kidneys. And so you may be, a secondary thing may be that you're anemic, which adds more insult to injury. The standard treatments, you want to keep the blood pressure down, right? So any antihypertensive medications are really key here. Depending on if, you have high blood lipids or what, you also want to treat that. If the heart is, so you treat that with statin drugs. And then if the heart is not pumping efficiently, where there's more blood left in the ventricles or the atria, right? So the heart can't pump out that much, hence the ejection fraction is getting lower and lower. Then you have more blood staying in the ventricles. You have more blood staying in the ventricles, then you're more prone to clot. So a lot of times heart failure patients are also put on blood thinners.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the main things. So any type of thing, drugs to bring down blood pressure is a big thing. And also to keep the to keep your heart rhythm, your heart rate sustained, so it doesn't go too low or too high. So some patients may also have like a pacemaker implanted or something like that. Or basically, if they have arrhythmias associated with it, they may actually go in there and take care of the arrhythmia also, so that doesn't contribute to the heart failure. So those are the standard medications without really getting into, the details and all that. Basically, after that, you're just using the medications, the pharmaceutical medications, to help with symptom management. So if somebody is having a lot of fluid buildup, you're going to give them a diuretic.
Right.
If somebody is having like arrhythmias, you're going to give something to help stabilize the heart rhythm. Mm-hmm. If somebody is prone to clotting, you're going to give something for that. And so a lot of times these heart failure patients are on a ton of meds, which, can also, unfortunately, contribute to what they're actually going through, right? So you have all these meds, your body has to detoxify it. This is one of the reasons why I tell my heart failure patients, don't drink alcohol, try not to smoke. First of all, the meds won't work as well, and then they also can contribute to toxicity of the heart, the mix altogether. Anyway, so
you can see why it builds up kind of the being stuck in the diagnosis that you were referring to earlier, because all those conventional treatments, most of them are, as you mentioned, symptom management versus, okay, how do we get out of this situation?
You're right. That's the thing. It's symptom management. And because of that, most doctors will say, well, you have heart failure and, we're going to try to manage the symptoms. But unfortunately, this is going to keep progressing. And, at some point, if it progresses too much, you may be up there. A select few may be up for heart transplant. And that is not where you want to go with it. Quick story here. I had a patient, actually a couple of patients, probably about a decade ago, who were dealing with heart failure, and their ejection fraction, usually they're recommended, people with heart failure are recommended to be on a transplant list. I think if the ejection fraction is less than 15. And so so I had two patients that were on this transplant list. One of them actually got the transplant. The other one is still alive today and never got the transplant without any symptoms. And the symptoms this particular person was having at the time was just extreme fatigue, a little bit of swelling, and a slight difficulty breathing with any type of exertion. So we're just talking about normal activity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the person that had the transplant was successful. But typically those transplants, you have a life expectancy of 8 to 10 years after the transplant. Well, this person is no longer with us, whereas the other person who didn't have the transplant, and we treat them conventionally. I worked with a kind of integrative cardiologist, put them on the right meds to help sustain their heart and treat the symptoms. But we also did a lot of nutraceutical interventions, which they're still doing. Their ejection fraction went from, I think it was 15%. Now they're up to 40%. You really want your ejection fraction up around 55%, but at 40%, there's no symptoms. They're living their life today, and their heart is being monitored occasionally, but they still go exercise. They're living a normal life, and they're doing great.
Wow.
So, yeah. So that's really, it's telling. It's just really telling that that you can reverse it. And at the time, is really surprising for me, especially with what I was taught in medical school. Is like, once you have heart failure, it's kind of like this downward slide. But that's not necessarily true. You can live a normal life and live to the end of your days, and hopefully something besides heart failure is going to kill you before that, before your heart actually completely fails.
Right. That's very interesting. Now, are some of the nutraceuticals that you're about to go through, is that what this person was taking? And also,
yes.
I'm just curious, was this in Washington?
No. This was here while I was in my practice here in North Carolina.
That's awesome that you have like a cardiologist that is
yeah,
part of the team.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, with heart failure, I definitely will always refer out to a cardiologist. They need to be followed. And any of the interventions that I do with it, most cardiologists, if they're worth their weight in salt, as far as being a cardiologist, are going to be thrilled that I'm doing what I'm doing. So anyway, let's go over that. I mean, let's go over the nutraceuticals. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff I could certainly talk about with heart failure, but we would be here all day. I mean, there's some neat things on the horizon that really that are really cool to think about, like stem cell therapy. I mean, wouldn't that be great, right? I mean, if longevity, a lot of these longevity experts say that we can live to, should be able to live to 120 years and beyond. You're thinking around, if you're able to do that, eventually you're going to have parts that wear out. And
right.
one of the main parts that wear out is this pump that we have, the heart. And wouldn't it be great if they can just grow a lab grown heart based on your own cells and just put it back in you? Because if you can do that, you're giving somebody a lot more life, unlike a transplant, right? Because once you're on a heart transplant, that's not your tissue. So you're going to have to be on a lot of anti-rejection drugs. And part of the issues where life expectancy is, 8 to 10, 12 years is because you're dealing with the drugs that are causing that. And it's not, your body can, you're fighting against something where your body sees it as foreign. But sticking your own heart based on your own cells with your own genetics in there is pretty cool to think about. I mean, we're so far away from that right now that I don't know. I hope we see it in our lifetime. I just don't know when that's going to be clinically available to the masses.
Right.
So the best we can do is, symptom management and nutraceutical treatment and lifestyle change.
Man, an organ transplant just seems so nuts. It's just crazy that we can do that, and that the body can just it is nuts.
Yeah. So one thing about heart failure, right? If you're not oxygenating the tissues as well, you kind of have a backup in the system, and the cells are not able to function optimally. And part of the problem with heart failure is your energy generating organelles within your heart cells, the mitochondria specifically, are overworked. These are the power plants of your cells. And this is where they need to be on top of, you need to keep healthy mitochondria within all these cells. This is kind of the basics of how I help with heart failure. Is I want to make sure that the mitochondria within the cardiocytes that's the cardiac muscle are functioning optimally. So that's what I'm doing. That's the main thing. And so to do that, I want to make sure that the person's on a good diet. The main diets that seem to really benefit heart failure are the DASH diet, right? Dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So there we go, hypertension. We want to keep blood pressure low.
I feel like I know what you're going to say next.
Yeah, the Mediterranean diet, right? And the Mediterranean diet is the next one. And that one, these diets are really healthy because they just help keep sodium levels appropriate, not too high, not too low. So there's some good research on those. With heart failure patients, they have across the board, pretty much, they are going to be low in their micronutrients. Subclinically, they're going to be low for the most part. So minerals, potassium, zinc, the big one, magnesium. Anytime these patients are on diuretics, they're losing tons of this stuff. B vitamins are another one that really needs to be supported. People with heart failure can really go low in certain B vitamins like thiamine, B12, and that type of thing. We want to make sure that those are doing okay. So a good high potency multivitamin tends to cover that stuff. Exercise, this is another thing that can be really beneficial for heart failure patients, which I guess is kind of counterintuitive, right? You're thinking, well, why do you want to put more stress on the heart? Well, you want to put enough stress on the heart that keeps the heart healthy, but you don't want to put too much stress on the heart. So I'm really weary of people that have heart failure. I certainly don't want them putting sustained stress on the heart where they're going and running like a marathon, but getting their heart rate up for a short amount of time and bringing it back down is good. So any HIIT workouts may be good as long as it's not a sustained, where the heart is just pumping out and working too hard for too long. Or rest-based workouts where you work out to where, you feel like you need to rest, you rest as you need, and then you do it again, bring the heart rate up. So exercise is great. It's kind of like finding that Goldilocks point. Not too much, but definitely not too little.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, if you are at a stage where you're having fluid buildup, you can, use your muscular action, your muscle contraction to help pump that fluid out of there in a safe way.
Yeah, that's right.
That's very beneficial.
You're exactly right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, you're using your second pump, right, which are your muscles. So yeah, that's another way it can be very, very beneficial. This is huge. The next thing I want to talk about, this is huge not only in Chinese medicine, but also Western medicine. In Chinese medicine, too much stress on the heart. I'm talking about mental emotional stress here. Anxiety is a heart killer. Like feeling overwhelmed for a sustained amount of time puts tremendous amount of stress on the heart. This is something that I just tell, I want my patients, and we've talked about it on this podcast numerous times, is anything that can help quell the anxiety where you don't perceive it as so threatening anymore, right? There's many ways to do that. Getting plenty of sleep, meditation, exercise, appropriate exercise is a big deal with that too. You want to make sure that you're not overwhelmed with life and you're not taking life too seriously where it is affecting your heart. So that's a big deal to get under control. That's the foundational stuff for heart failure for me. And then now we go into the nutrients, and I'm going to try to go into the nutraceuticals based on what I feel are the most important ones.
Okay.
Right.
And
Number,
in order, is this a particular
yeah,
order or just okay?
yeah, I'm going to try to go based on the order. I mean, there's going to be some disagreement with this with some people, but the order that I use that I feel like is the most important, and I'm basing it on what has the most evidence
Okay.
for support. Number one that I'll do, and think about what we're doing here. We are trying to support the mitochondria within the heart cells. And one of the best nutraceuticals that can do that is CoQ10, coenzyme Q10. It has a central role in maintaining proper cardiac function and producing energy in the mitochondria. It's also a potent antioxidant. It also, believe it or not, helps maintain healthy blood sugar. It also has a positive effect on the mitochondria elsewhere in the body. So it also has a positive effect on the kidneys. One study, randomized controlled study, this is with patients with moderate to severe heart failure. So when I'm talking about moderate to severe heart failure, without getting into the details, just think about people who have shortness of breath, probably have some fluid buildup, probably with minimal movement, are getting shortness of breath, like just doing everyday activities. We're not even talking about exercise. Those who received 100 milligrams of CoQ10, they were given this 3 times a day. Now, this is also in addition to standard treatment, showed significant improvement in their symptoms and also reduced their risk of a major cardiovascular events. People with heart failure are at very, very high risk for infarctions and heart attacks and strokes and that type of thing. So that's pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another study, this was I think this study, they were assessing CoQ10 levels in cardiac patients, and showed that those with the highest levels of CoQ10 significantly lowered their mortality rates. Also, CoQ10 significantly increased exercise capacity in those taking it as compared to those that were not taking it.
At what point do you recommend, or do you even, CoQ10 as a supplement for the average person?
Well, I can tell you this, it's certainly not going to hurt somebody to take CoQ10, right?
Mm-hmm.
CoQ10, if you get a really good CoQ10 product, the only issue I see with it is that it can be a little expensive.
Okay.
But I mean, when we're talking about the expense compared to drugs, nutraceuticals are super, super cheap, pennies cheap. But unfortunately, this stuff comes out of your own pocket. It's not going to be covered by insurance. But I recommend anybody who has a family history of heart issues, no matter what they are, but especially heart failure or any type of genetic linked cardiomyopathies, CoQ10 is what they should be taking. That should be number one. Let's see, there's another study. These studies, they did a big review. I think up to like 20 studies on CoQ10 and heart failure, and what they found was that CoQ10 led to statistical significant increase of like almost 4%, 3.7% in ejection fraction. That's pretty huge, right? So there you go. CoQ10 does have some evidence showing that it can improve ejection fraction. So that's number one.
Yeah.
The number one thing that I would do. There's so just to summarize some of the studies, right? You're going to be less likely to die from heart failure taking CoQ10. Some of the big studies did 300 milligrams of CoQ10. CoQ10 usually comes in 100 milligram tablets. I think you can find it in 300. The one I use for my heart failure patients or cardiovascular patients has 200. So I'll just have them do, 2 of those a day. So they're up to 400 milligrams. You're not going to go wrong with it giving too much or going overboard with the CoQ10. But anyway, so you're less likely to die from heart failure, less likely to die from any cause. You're less likely to have any major cardiovascular event, and you are more likely to have a significant improvement in heart function. So ejection fraction improves quite significantly. All right, so number 2 that I use is hawthorn. All right, this is Cretagus. This is a traditional cardiovascular tonic for the heart. It's an herb. The reason why I love it is because it has very, very little downside. Unlike a herb that some people probably heard of called digitalis or foxglove, which has a very narrow therapeutic window, and it's kind of fallen out of favor with a little bit. They're still using it in conventional medicine, believe it or not. But digitalis, or what they call digoxin, is the prescription medication of foxglove, is basically a herbal component that maintains the strength of heart contraction, right? So it helps the heart pump harder. With each pump, it gets more blood out. It helps oxygenate the body. The problem with it is it can be toxic to the body if you don't keep that therapeutic window appropriate, and it has a very narrow therapeutic window. Hawthorn, on the other hand, doesn't work quite as well as digitalis in keeping the heart tone, but it works good enough, and it has no negative side effects. So people can be on hawthorn or Cretagus for the rest of their lives. And there's hawthorn berry teas and stuff you could find at health food stores and stuff like that. But you want to make sure you're taking enough of this. And typically what I do for my patients is I want them taking at least like 600 milligrams to 900 milligrams a day of standardized hawthorn extract. And again, with this, hawthorn has shown to help the heart in many ways. It helps keep the blood pressure low, but it also has helped with ejection fraction. And there are studies that have shown that. I think one of the trials that's shown that is what's called the SPICE trial, and these were like over 2,000 heart failure patients that had left ventricular ejection fraction that was less than like 35%, and they dosed 900 milligrams a day of this hawthorn extract and saw significant improvement in ejection fraction and overall function of the heart. So that's my number 2. Then my number 3, and this one just is across the board, is a good cardiovascular tonic. I recommend in all my protocols that people get on this supplement anyway, and it's just omega-3 fats, and that's EPA and DHA. You want a good amount of both of those omega-3s. So that's ecopentanoic acid and docahexanoic acid, EPA and DHA. And I like to do with my heart failure patients up to 3 grams of those combined. Unfortunately, most fish oil supplements, when you read the back, are just going to say like 1,000 milligrams. If like you go buy them over the counter, like let's say you go get a Costco brand, it will say 1,000 milligrams of fish oil. That's not going to do it, because you need to look what the amounts of the EPA and DHA are. All right. They can say 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, but it may have very little of that. So you want to make sure you're getting enough of that. And I can lower the pill load for my patients on this with the lowest I got it to get 3 grams of EPA, DHA. With certain brands, is I can get it down to 3 caps a day of that. But any type of omega-3 is really going to help the heart. Let's see.
That was 3 grams per day, Keoni.
Yeah, that's 3 grams per day. It's better with food. And by the way, it's better absorbed with food. And then by the way, another one, yeah. And then another one that I like combining with that is also vital for heart. And usually they come together when I prescribe it, because most heart failure patients are also low in vitamin D, is I'll combine that with vitamin D. It comes in the capsules that I give. So let's see, a meta-analysis. This was like 12 randomized controlled trials. over 2,000 patients. This was looking at omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. They found that ejection fraction in the left ventricle had much greater improvement than people not taking it. The dosages were up to 3 grams a day of the fish oil. So that's good. So that fish oil alone seemed to improve ejection fraction. Again, this stuff is very, very safe. The other thing I'll say about fish oil that people may not know is that it does have a mild blood thinning effect also, which is also a great thing for your cardiovascular system, and has also been shown to optimize your blood lipids. All right, so number 4 that I'll use is carnitine. All right, and people in the fitness industry think about carnitine as being that amino acid that helps transport fatty acids into the mitochondria. So we're thinking about mitochondria here, and they think about it as a fat burning supplement. So people do it for like fat burning and lowering their body fat. But carnitine is really just one of those transporting amino acids that aids the mitochondria in burning fatty acids. And it really works well in the heart. So it can really help the heart there. And there's some research that indicates that being deficient in carnitine is associated with cardiomyopathy. And that also supplementing with carnitine up to, I think at the low end, 1.5 grams to the high end, 7 grams of carnitine daily increased exercise capacity and also improved ejection fraction and clinical outcomes. That's pretty cool. So yeah. And carnitine is another one. You're just not going to have problems with it. I use a powder form of carnitine, a granular form of carnitine. Just have my patients take mix it in water or just take a teaspoon of it. It has a really sour taste to it. It's almost like a lemony kind of sour taste, the carnitine. But it's easy to get down. But that's pretty neat. And then you're probably like, all right, Keoni, when are you going to talk about magnesium? Well, yeah. Usually I put magnesium at number 1. I think CoQ10 should have that, but magnesium is huge. Magnesium, I like to do it for the main reason, it definitely supports ATP, mitochondrial function. But the other thing is, I use magnesium across the board for a number of things for cardiovascular support. It's been shown to help optimize blood pressure or lower it, but it's also been shown to improve heart rate variability. And you want your heart rate variability improved because you are going to be less likely to have arrhythmias and things like that. So that's one thing that it has been shown to improve. And 300 milligrams is the standard dose in the studies of magnesium. I usually will dose my heart failure patients up to 800 milligrams daily. And it improves the heart function across the board. So we're talking about arterial elasticity. So if you improve arterial elasticity, and magnesium does this alone, guess what you're doing? So the heart doesn't have to work as hard. It's not pushing against as much resistance as it would be without it. Also, the other thing about it is if people that are going into heart failure, they are really, compared to the average Americans, which are already subclinically deficient in magnesium, they tend to be clinically deficient, but definitely subclinically deficient in magnesium. It is one of those things that they should definitely be on.
Right.
What else do I want to talk about? Let me just talk about briefly 2 other things, and then we'll just end. So this is where I pull out my my herbals, right? Hawthorn is one of my main ones, but there's another herbal that I'll use that's very common in Ayurvedic medicine or Indian medicine from the subcontinent of India. It's called Arjuna, Arjuna. This is also a very non-toxic herb. It works a lot like hawthorn. I'll use it also. You'll see it sometimes in formulations combined with hawthorn. It has a modest lipid lowering effect. It also has seemed to improve arterial endothelial function. So it enables the arteries to dilate appropriately and thus increase in blood flow. And it also seems to improve across the board, just the squeeze of the muscle tone. So it can also, I don't know of any specific studies, but it also seems to, as far as the outcomes go, improve ejection fraction also. So sometimes I'll use Arjuna also. There's another herb also called convallaria, which I will use sometimes, but typically I don't have to go to these other herbs. I'll just use hawthorn. And then there's another nutraceutical that I'll use also. When I talk to my patients, I'll be like, it's like, I want to be able to balance something that they're going to do, right, and believe in,
Right.
without giving them too much to do as far as taking supplements, right? But another thing I'll do is I'll give them D-ribose, and D-ribose is a naturally occurring, it's a pentose sugar that is a key component to ATP. So it aids in energy generation. Again, we're talking about supporting mitochondria with this type of sugar, ribose. And it's been shown also to improve heart function, improve in ejection fraction. It helps the heart, keeps the variability good. It keeps the heart pumping in a way that is going to reduce the likelihood of arrhythmias and things like that. It's a good one to be on. It's not my first choice, but I will recommend that. And the standard dose that I usually recommend for that, and again, it comes in a powder, is like 5 grams a day.
Okay.
You can just mix it in water, just take a spoonful of it, dissolves really easily. But those are the main things. Let me just go over them real quick. As far as the supplements go, I'll just name them out. CoQ10, about 200 to 300 milligrams a day. Hawthorn, I try to get up to about 900 milligrams a day. That's Cretagus. Omega-3 fats, 3 grams a day with that. Carnitine, I'll typically do about 3 grams a day of that. And D-ribose, about 5 grams a day of that. And then I just want to make sure the vitamin D levels are good. I want to make sure magnesium levels are good. Do about 300 to 600 milligrams of magnesium. Other things that I'll consider, that I'll put on my list for people, is I'll use taurine. This is an amino acid that is very cardioprotective. It has some neat studies on it as far as improving heart function. And then one of the things to just supplement to increase energy, give the building blocks for increasing energy to the heart, is creatine. So this is creatine. And this is kind of what I'll do for people who are further along in the heart failure. I'll give them that. It just gives the heart building blocks to aid with its function. I mean, I think let me see if I can find that study. Okay, here. So a randomized double-blind study. This is 100 subjects engaged in 8 weeks of an exercise program. Of course, they are doing diet also, but they receive 5 grams a day of creatine monohydrate. At the end of the study, the treatment group demonstrated reduced inflammatory markers, IL-6, and improved endothelial function. So all of that can aid the heart functioning better. So creatine may be something that people want to consider also. Anyway, that's basically what I want to go over, Brian, with that, because this is we're talking about, you live long enough, you're going to have heart issues. The pump is going to be compromised, especially if you're living with, higher blood pressure than normal, and blood pressure that even doesn't, where your doctor may not even think it's necessary to treat with blood pressure lowering medications. Even that can cause the heart to have problematic issues long term. Right. So we want to get the most quality of life that we can out of the body for as long as we can. And these heart nutrients can really help with that. And no matter what stage you are in the heart failure process, those nutraceuticals that I went over can significantly help and are not going to give people any negative side effects.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously they're going to be helpful for your overall muscular health too, with a variety of I mean, they're helpful in a variety of ways for a lot of your health, but
Yeah, so
the
they have
heart being a muscle, they're
right. Yeah, broad acting effects. They're not only just skeletal muscle, right? We're
right.
talking about like organ function across the board. These things can help.
Yeah.
And I just me being a more integrative type doctor, naturopathic physician, it's one of those things. You're working against a cultural mindset that's been ingrained in people that to treat things you need prescription meds, and there's no doubt some of that can significantly help. And then secondarily, people will be like, well, maybe nutraceuticals can help. There's a lot of good evidence that nutraceuticals can help with heart failure. I just wish it was the other way around, right? Where people are not going to be as reticent to put out some dollars for nutraceuticals to support their heart health. Usually it goes the other way around, right? It's like do the prescription meds, and then let's see if I can do nutraceuticals to help with that. I just wish it was the other way around, where people would focus on the lifestyle stuff, the nutraceutical intervention first, because a lot of times it keeps you away, right? It just keeps you away from the conventional doc.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Anything else, Keoni?
No, I think that's it. I guess the one last thing I'd say, me and you are not certainly not cardiologists. We're not experts in congestive heart failure. With my heart failure patients, I always recommend across the board, as I know you do too, Brian, you want to make sure that they have a cardiologist on board. Most cardiologists are not even going to have any complaints about the nutraceuticals that I went through. It's just not going to be problematic for them. At the very least, if somebody was on CoQ10 or Hawthorne, a cardiologist, they just did any type of looking into the research, would be thrilled that their heart failure patients were on that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully some of them listen to this episode and start suggesting it too.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Until next time, we will talk with you then, and be well.
Yep. Be well. Take care, everybody.